what is the process of a paternity test in order to prove Israeli citizenship, and also a real-life story that happened in our office related to the paternity test. Hi, my name is Joshua Pex. I'm an Israeli immigration lawyer, and in this video we're going to talk a little bit about the process of proving Israeli citizenship from birth based on paternity. So first of all, maybe you know that the law of citizenship, also called the law of nationality, says that any baby, any child that is born to either an Israeli mother or an Israeli father, if they were Israelis on the day of birth, also the child is an Israeli citizen, whether the birth was here in Israel or abroad, it doesn't matter. Once you're born to an Israeli parent, you're an Israeli from birth. Sounds simple, right? It is simple, legally speaking, but many times in reality, it can become a little bit complicated, and especially we're talking about cases where the father is Israeli, but the mother is a foreigner. So in all kinds of different situations, when coming to register the child, the Israeli Immigration Office, Misrad Apnim, they're also in charge of the population registry. They will demand the paternity test in order to prove this fatherhood. So again, it only has to do with the fathers. With the mothers, it's not an issue because it's always certain who the mother of the baby is. But with the father Israeli and the mother foreign, especially in cases where the baby was born outside of Israel, or the registration wasn't done within 30 days, okay? So the registration needs to be done within 30 days. For example, if it was done more than a year, or in cases where the parents had a home birth, or all kinds of different situations where the parents weren't married. So the parents will go to Misrad Apnim to register the baby, even if in the birth certificate the father's name appears. For example, they bring a birth certificate from Russia or Ethiopia or even the United States, the father will appear in the birth certificate, but in the Israeli consulate abroad or the Ministry of Interior in Israel, they will say, no, we're not certain that you are the father, we need to do a paternity test. So it sounds relatively simple, just take the DNA, compare, and prove the fatherhood, but in reality, in Israel it's more complicated. In order to even get permission to do the paternity test, you need to go to the family court. So this is how the process starts. You open a file within the family court, and you need to pay a fee and prepare a petition and ask for permission to do the paternity test. First, you need to prove that the mother, in the case that she's not Jewish many times, then you need to bring all the documents, and you need to have them with apostille if they're from abroad, the birth certificates, documents that show that the parents were really together, photocopies of the passports. You need to prepare the petition, submit it to the court, get a permission or court order to go to a lab, a DNA lab, where they take samples of usually the saliva. If it's in Israel, both the mother and the father and the child need to go together and give samples. If they're abroad, it can also be sent to the Israeli consulate abroad. So they all give the samples, it goes back to the lab. They compare the samples and they give the report. In the report, it's interesting, it will many times say 99% or even 99%, 0.5% that this is the father of the child. And based on this report, the judge of the family court will give an order. Yes, he is the father and he is the Israeli. Then with that, you go to the Ministry of Interior and register the child as an Israeli. You get a Teudat Zehut number, ID, Israeli ID number. You can also get the Israeli passport. So the child is Israeli according to the Israeli nationality law. So this sounds a sort of exhausting process, and it is, but it's very technical, and usually you go through the motions, and at the end you will succeed to prove that this is the father and the child is Israeli. But there can also be times where the process becomes more difficult or impossible. And this is a real case that we've had several years ago. young American student at the Hebrew University here in Jerusalem came to us and said, I know I have an Israeli father. Here he is. Look at my birth certificate. This is the father. He left my mother when I was very young. He moved to Israel. I was hardly in touch with him all my childhood, but now I want to discover my Israeli roots. I came to study here. I've renewed contact with my father. I wanted to also register as an Israeli, but when I went to the Ministry of Interior, they said, you have to do a paternity test. So I said, okay, this is possible. We went through the process, but the Ministry of Interior, represented by the state attorney lawyers, they also demanded the mother give her consent and even participate and give a sample of her DNA. Well, the mother was nowhere to be found. I discovered only at that point that this girl hadn't had contact with her mother for many years. She actually grew up with her grandmother in California, and the mother might have been homeless. She had mental health issues. So she said, I can't get my mother. We tried. I told her, you have to find a private eye, contact your mother, but it was not possible. So we did get permission from the court, which is unusual, but we got permission to do the test only with the father and the child. We had a report from a social worker and the grandmother that the mother was not in the picture. So the judge said, okay, only the father and the girl. So we did the DNA test. We were summoned to the family law court, and in the court we discovered that this was not actually her father. So this was very embarrassing, sort of an unusual situation. Suddenly I was there with this father, or alleged father and child. They did think that they were related, but they were not. So this is a story that we had. This is very unusual. It doesn't usually happen, but this is what does happen sometimes in life. So if you have any questions regarding immigration to Israel or the paternity process, please contact us.